we're gonna hang out in Luke chapter 16. So this is gonna feel like the obligatory money sermon for the year. If you've been in church for a while, you feel like that happens once a year. You're grumpy every time you show up for that sermon, and it's awkward and uncomfortable, and nobody likes it. That's not actually how this happened. This passage from Luke chapter 16 has been my white whale for like a year, because this parable that it's the parable of the shrewd manager, and you'll understand a little bit in a minute, but it's like this wild parable where Jesus compliments a dude who literally embezzles money. And you're like, what the heck is happening right now? And so we were able to, it worked out in this God Questions series, because he asked some pretty pointed questions at the end. And so it's not that Jesus endorses embezzlement. Let me start there from the beginning. He doesn't, but he makes a solid point. But anyway, so we're gonna talk about money today. And so just roll with me. Let's roll through it. What we're going to do is we're going to hit the principles. We're going to hit the principles that Jesus hits in here, and then I want to unpack it at the end, because to be honest with you, this is the one that you always hear stories. I invited my uncle, and he finally came. I've been inviting him for 3 years. He finally came. He's never coming back. And like, to be honest with you, that just sucks, because I understand why that's the case, right? I get it. I get that there's all sorts of other stuff. We'll unpack that at the end. But it just sucks, because you spend your whole life making money. You spend your whole life trying to provide for your family. And daggone it, God wants to work in that area. Amen. He wants to change your life in that area. He wants to transform your finances so you don't have to worry about them. And it's not that you're going to be happy, healthy, and wealthy for the rest of your life. It's not that money's going to fall from the sky when you need it. Well, maybe it will, but it's not that it's going to fall from the sky and you're going to have a Ferrari. It's just that God's going to bless you so you don't have to worry about it. And he wants to work in that area of your life so badly, but we're so cut off from it, you know? And that just to be honest, like, that's awful. You spend most of your waking hours trying to make money or worrying about it or spending it. And then we don't want God to have anything to do with it. That's wild. And so anyway, let's unpack this story. This is Luke chapter 16. We're going to start in verse 1. Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day, a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, "What's this I hear about you? Get your report in order, because you're going to be fired." It's a bad day. The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss is firing me, and I don't have the strength to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I'm fired." So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" The man replied, "I owe 800 gallons of olive oil." It's a lot of olive oil. So the manager told him, "Take the bill and change it to 400 gallons. "How much do you owe my employer?" he asked the next man. "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. "Here," the manager said, "take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. If you're faithful in the little things, you'll be faithful in large ones. But if you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with the greater responsibilities. And if you're untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven?" That's the question. If you're untrustworthy with worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? That's a big question. It's a big question, because this is the indication. If you don't handle what God gives you well, why would you expect him to trust you with his blessings? And like, ultimately, that's I think where we end up in American Christianity. We don't want God in our money at all, right? We don't want God in our money at all. We're like, "Hey, you can deal with my heart. You can deal with my emotions. You can yell at me for cussing too much. You can make me feel bad for being, angry at the person who cut me off on the road, but don't get into my money. Like, that's mine. I earned it. That's not yours," right? And if you think about it logically, I understand that that's a real thing, but if you think about it logically, that's the reaction of the 2-year-old who won't let you have something you literally just gave them. Like if you actually believe in God and you actually believe that he is the creator of the world and he created all things and he created all things and he gave you free will, but he designed you. He gave you the gifts you have. He gave you the will to do the things you do. He charted your course in such a way that you could be in this place, to have these blessings, and then to say, don't come into my money at all. That's legitimately, this actually happened the other day. I was talking to my daughter, and she asked me a question. I said, none of your business. Right? She's 6. I said, none of your business. That's an adult thing. I can't tell you about that one. And she goes, okay. And then about 5 minutes later, I asked her a question and she goes, none of your business. And I said, baby, that don't work. And she goes, how come I have things that are none of my business, but my business is your business? And I said, because I'm your daddy. And you don't understand adult things yet. One day, it'll be plenty of your business, but you don't understand adult things yet. But everything about you is my business, right? Like, it's that reaction that we have with God, you know? And look, I can understand the feeling. Like, I can understand the feeling. I can even say that, like, I feel the feeling. But it leaves us lacking his blessings in those areas. It leaves us confounded when we hear him say, don't worry about what you're gonna eat. Don't worry about what you're gonna wear. I clothe the flowers. I clothe the birds. They look good. They eat well. Don't worry. And we're like, what? I worry all the time. Why am I worrying so much? Well, you're not receiving the heavenly riches because you're not faithful to him. Like, that's just the truth of the Bible. And like, let me unpack the principles before I get into that, because I want to actually have the conversation. So the first thing as it starts out is this. The first thing, there was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day, a report came to that manager that the manager was wasting money. So the employer called him in and said, what's this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you're going to be fired. The first principle is this, like, you will one day be called to account for what God's given you. One day you'll be called to account for what God's given you. Like, that's like, this is true. We're totally fine with it being true of everything else. We're fine with it being true of our relationships. We're fine with it being true of everything else. But like, when it comes to money, we're like, that seems weird. Dude, you have to unpack this from a biblical standpoint, because now we're detached from our means of provision. So like, now we do a job and we receive a paycheck. We're super detached from our means of provision, actually, because we do a job and we receive a paycheck after the government took 30% of it, and we don't even think about the 30% that disappeared before it hit our account. We are very detached from our means of provision, right? But in a biblical context, this is far more logical and linear, because you're talking about pretty much an agrarian economy, and if not an agrarian economy, a barter economy. So you're growing things, you're making things, and you're trading. That's the whole story here. I have, how many gallons of olive oil do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil. There's no way that you have 800 gallons of olive oil at your house. Well, if you do, you have a problem, right? But like, that's his line of credit. That's how much he owes, and this is money we're talking about, right? And so like, we're far more detached. But in this sense, like, if you're a farmer, which is most of the context of the Bible when he talks about provision and everything else, if you're a farmer, like, very much your living grows from the field. You interact with it every day. And when it comes in, you touch it, you feel it, you see it. And if you don't have enough of it, that's a bad thing, because it's not money. And it's not money that you can just kind of go and do whatever. Like, that's what you're going to eat. And out of what's left over, you're going to have extra that you can then sell or trade to get other things. But like, that's what you're going to eat. That's what you got to live off of. That's everything. And so for God to say, hey, like, your living came from the ground that I made. Like, what you did to make that plant grow and to bring it up, and the materials you used to harvest that plant, and the rain that came to feed it, I did all of that. I did all of that. The idea that he would call us to account for those things makes a lot more sense to us, right? But when you sit in front of a keyboard all day, it's a lot easier to be detached from the things that God did to make that happen. Because you're like, well, that's plastic. Some dude came up with that idea. And whoever invented cubicles, I hate him. You know what I mean? And we get to, we're just far more detached from the earth and from the acts of God that cause these things to happen. But it doesn't make the truth any less true. The gifts you have that allow you to do that job, God gave you. The person who had the brain that allowed them to create the things that allow you to do the job, God made them. Like everything we have comes from God. Everything we have goes back to him. And so in a very real sense, we owe him everything. And so when we die one day, we'll be called to account for what we did with what he gave us. Makes me feel a lot worse about my Amazon account, right? Sometimes we're stupid and frivolous. I'll tell you this right now. Tomorrow this is so stupid. My Apple Watch has scratches on it. And I was like, that's really bothering me. And so tomorrow I have this stuff that's coming in the mail that I'm gonna rub on my Apple Watch, and it's gonna make it 50% less scratchy, or so they say. Stupid. Like I'm gonna have to stand before God one day and be like, sorry. Right? You know, my bad, dude. Oh. Maybe it won't be that detailed. Maybe God's not a CPA. We'll see. But I will be called to account for what I did with what he gave me. And even if it's in a big macro sense, that's important. Like, what did you do with what he gave you? And so the next thing, you go into the story, and the manager, he does super corrupt stuff. He calls up the account holders and he says, hey, how much do you owe? All right, bring this in, bring this in. He changes all the stuff, and he commits all sorts of crimes, and he leaves his master with a lot less than he would have gotten. But he now has credit stored up with these other people. And so since he has credit stored up with these other people, he's not going to be destitute. And Jesus says to the disciples, you got to remember, he's talking to the disciples. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light. To be his disciples in this moment would be the worst. Because this is what he says. He says, hey, you know what's crazy? That guy was wrong, but he thought about what he did more than you think about what you do, and what you do is more important than what he's doing. Like he put more thought into how to make this work out than you do, but you represent me. Ugh. Right? That's tough. At the end of the day, in a lot of ways, it's true. When I teach pastoral, we do a pastoral education program. And when I teach them, the first session, we jump into a leadership book, and it's a secular leadership book. And there's some people who will come in and be like, ugh, why are we doing this? You know what I mean? Because they think they're gonna like parse the Greek for 2 years. And I just look at them, I'm like, well, you have the most important, you believe you're called to be a pastor, which means I believe you have the most important calling on earth because you're supposed to shepherd his people. But the fact of the matter is the church in America is shrinking and businesses are growing. So we're gonna learn from them how to lead and then apply biblical principles so we're not jerks and so that we're not sinful. But there's something in our leadership practices that are broken. Why? Well, because they care more about making money than we do about saving people. Which is tough, but I mean, I know pastors that, well, just to be honest, I hate talking to pastors a lot of times because you start talking about stuff and it makes me sad because we end up talking about, it just doesn't matter. You know, like you bring something up and they start talking about something that has something to do with some intricate theological principle, or they care more about building the gym at their church than they do about reaching people. But the gym is always called a community center, but it always turns out that the community doesn't come because they're not welcome. So now we got a $5 million basketball court. For what? For a bunch of unathletic 40-something dudes to play once a week and try not to cuss at each other? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, to have like 3 events in a year where we all bring in really fatty food that we spent way too little time making, you know? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, how does that make any sense at all? You know, like, one of the coolest things, one of my favorite things actually is, I don't think I've ever actually unpacked this. It just hit me now. But it is one of my favorite things now that it hits me. My dad has been a pastor pretty much his whole career. And when he was at one of the first church I ever went to, or at least remember going to, they were talking about what to do next because they had some money in the savings account. They wanted to do some things. And they talked about building a gym, and he convinced them to build a parking lot. Because if more people were going to show up, they needed a place to park. But if you built a gym, what are you going to do with it? Like, maybe we should think a little bit more like that, you know? You don't see Target building huge break rooms for their employees, but they have huge parking lots, you know? So anyway, that's the principle that Jesus is chasing here. And so he unpacks, he just hits them like real quick. It's if you're not paying attention, you don't catch it. So he says, the rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. So here's the lesson. Be generous. Be generous with what you have. Store up your treasures in heaven. He says it in other places that way, right? Store up your treasures in heaven where moths can't come in and devour and where rust doesn't destroy, right? And so store up your treasures in heaven. Be generous. That's the first point or second point. The next thing, he goes straight, it's quick. If you're faithful with the little things, you'll be faithful in the large ones. But if you're dishonest in the little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. So this is a principle we hear all the time, right? And people tell you that, like when, at least, I don't know, if you grew up in the church, that was what I would always get. And when I would be like wanting to do more, or, when you're a little kid and you're walking around and you're like, why can't I do that? And it's like, be faithful in the little things, and then God will trust you with more. And you hear that and you're like, okay, cool, this is about responsibility and everything else. Jesus is tying it directly to money, right? So be responsible and be shrewd, like be smart with your money. Or not be responsible, be generous and be shrewd. Shrewd, the word could be misrepresented if you take it from the story as devious, but that's not what the word means at all. It means to be resourceful. It means to have showing a clever awareness or resourcefulness. It means like think about what you're doing here. Be smart with what you're doing here. Find ways to make that turn into more. Because what you do with little will be representative of what you do with a lot. And if you do believe that God is the God of the universe, that he created everything, and that the blessings that you receive come from him, and you also are a parent, you understand that he's not going to give you a lot if you can't be responsible with a little. This is really simple. If you have little kids, or if you've ever had little kids, you get it. Because you're not going to give your 2-year-old a permanent marker until they show you that they won't color all over everything with a crayon, right? It's the same principle. We don't think about it that way, but it's absolutely the same principle. Because look, we gave our oldest, when she was like 2, a bunch of crayons. And then for whatever reason, Amanda and I were not paying attention. And like a week later, we looked and there was just a line underneath the TV. She just walked along, right? And that's what happened. And like, okay, this is what we know. She ain't getting a Sharpie anytime soon because she's gonna destroy stuff. And the principle is the same in our lives. And when you apply it to money, it's absolutely the same. You see it all the time. What happens to professional athletes? It's like a curse on some level because a lot of these guys will come in and for the very first time in their whole lives, they'll have tons of money. They'll have tons of money and they'll have very little training as to what to do with it. And then the next thing you know, you don't last long in professional athletics. Like you just don't last long as a professional. It doesn't, joints break. And the harder you use them, the quicker they break. Things go poorly. Head injuries are a real thing. Like this doesn't last long. And if you don't know how to use it, you're gonna ruin your whole world. You're gonna end up in more debt than you ever could have made for yourself if you never had the money in the first place. Because if you have a, I don't know, $30 million salary and you go, cool, now I'm gonna buy a $30 million house, that's all great till you blow $29 million of the salary that you didn't put down on the house. And then all of a sudden you're not getting that paycheck anymore. And now you have $29 million in debt. It's pretty hard to accumulate $29 million in debt when you make $50,000 a year. Sometimes having too much is a curse. And God being a good God is gonna disperse to you what you can handle because he loves you. So you have to be generous and you have to be shrewd. And then the next thing he says, the question is cool. If you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? But reverse the question. If you are trustworthy with worldly wealth, won't you be trusted with the true riches of heaven? That's the promise that we hear about in Matthew chapter 6 when he says, like, don't worry about where your next meal is gonna come from. Don't worry about these things. Why? Well, you don't have to worry because you've been trustworthy, and so your heavenly Father sees this and he's gonna let you live in the overflow. He's gonna let you live in the overflow of his blessing. He's gonna make it so that even when things that should overtake you come onto you, they don't. That doesn't mean that like you're gonna owe $1 million and then you're gonna get 3. It doesn't mean that you're gonna have a big bill and then you're gonna have a whole bunch more. It means that, I don't know how I've seen it in my life. It means that something hits you out of nowhere and you're like, oh my goodness. And then all of a sudden your tax return is within like $50 of that bill that you didn't know was coming. Or this literally happened last year. I got this truck. I shouldn't have this truck. I don't need this truck. I'm a pastor. I have a big truck. That's stupid. Sometimes we're stupid. God's still working on me with how much he can trust me. And so the thing about new trucks is the soundproofing is fantastic. Like, you know, you get in like an old car and you don't realize how loud a car is until you're in an old car. And all of a sudden you're screaming at the person in the passenger seat. So the soundproofing in this truck is great. Here's the curse of the soundproofing. I didn't realize my brakes were sticking until they were grinding. Because I didn't hear them, I had felt them. So now I need brakes on all 4 wheels. And I need rotors. And I need calipers. And Christmas is coming. And I didn't save for that. And the bill was really big. And then I received a gift that was within $100 of the bill within like 3 days. That's just God. It didn't make Christmas any easier than it would have been had it not happened. It just made it a lot easier than it would have been had I not been faithful in the first place. Like that's what living in the overflow looks like. That's what living in his blessing looks like. That's what God teaching you that you don't have to worry about everything, every single little thing looks like. It's not like, oh, it's not a $10,000 seed faith pledge that's gonna lead to you having $1 million in your bank account in 20 years. It's not an investment in the church that is going to lead to you being retiring a millionaire and having everything you ever wanted. It's not that at all. It's him reminding you on a regular basis, you're faithful to me, so I'll take care of you. Don't worry. And then eventually you get to a place where stuff pops up and you go, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do with this. And instead of going into your bank account and taking out all the dollars and cents and figuring out how you're going to rob Peter to pay Paul and calling 13 different lending organizations or whatever, or I don't know, going into your deep dark place and hiding in the closet because you're just terrified because life's going to kill you, or whatever it is, whatever your thing is, instead of doing that, you just go, God, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And he makes a way. He just makes a way. It's not, and the thing about it is, like, the blessing is so subtle that you miss it if you don't pay attention. But if you miss it, you don't trust him. Like, that's the way this is supposed to work. And so the principle at the end is simple. Jesus says this, I didn't read it yet, but Jesus says this in verse 13, no one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. So you can either serve your wallet or you can serve your creator. You can't serve both. Now, this is why the money sermon is terrible. There's a handful of things. Let's start with the basics in the Christian world. When we talk about being faithful to God and money, it's not an abstract idea. It's pretty nailed down. It's pretty nailed down. So it's the tithe, right? And so here's the problem with the tithe. It gets presented to you in a million different ways, and you hear it and you go, either that's grimy, or you go, church must be broke. Let me talk to the pastor, see what's wrong. Or you go, that guy is going to steal from me. I don't like him. Or you go, all of these other things, right? So the tithe, let's unpack that from the beginning. The tithe is 10%, and the idea was from the Old Testament, and it's 10% of what you bring in from the harvest that year, and it's used to provide for the Levites and to take care of the tabernacle and then eventually the temple. So it's made for the upkeep of the church. That's the whole idea, and it is a principle that carries over from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And so you'll hear people say, well, the tithe is an Old Testament principle. It doesn't apply to us anymore. Okay, there's two approaches you can take to this. And I'm just telling you Bible, right? I'm not gonna call you up. I'm not gonna check your giving records. I'm not gonna blame you for nothing. I don't care. You can walk out of here and do whatever you want. I'm just telling you the Bible so you understand it. Does that work? Everybody good? So the tithe is you'll hear people say, oh, it's an Old Testament principle, doesn't apply anymore. You can take two approaches to that if you're going to look at it biblically. The first one is, you're talking about first century Jews that started the church. Here's the thing about first century Jews. The idea that they would not have a set leadership structure for the church is insane, because they've lived under one from the beginning of the people. And it was the priests and the Levites. And those were the God servants that were made to kind of care for the religious aspect of the culture, right? And so because of this, the idea that they would, and the Levites didn't have land in the Old Testament. They weren't given, they were one of the tribes of Israel that was not given land. And so because they didn't have land, every tribe was told to allot certain amounts of what came in for the Levites. You see what I'm saying? So the idea that they wouldn't have what we now call pastors is crazy. They actually would. And we see this in Paul's writing, because he points out how, unlike most pastors, he's made his own living, because he doesn't want to be told by any of the people that he's trying to preach to that he's trying to take from them. So he sells tents so that they can't say that he's coming and trying to take from them. So this is a practice that's pretty well evident at the very beginning of the church. The second thing about it with that is the idea that they wouldn't have a physical space to meet in is also insane, because literally first century Jews heard the stories about how the temple was destroyed, and they are living in the second temple era. This would have been very important for them to have a physical space to meet in, because literally that was like the shame of their ancestors that the temple was destroyed and they were sent into exile. The second answer to the tithe, when people say that doesn't apply, it's an Old Testament principle, not a New Testament principle, is very simple. If you want to go to Jesus on how much to give, what he says to the rich young ruler is, sell everything you have and follow me. So we can go with the tithe, from the words of Jesus, we can go with the tithe, or we can sell everything we have and follow him. Like, you see what I'm saying? So if we're talking about being faithful to God with our money, this is how we would unpack it from a biblical context. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to make it make sense. But then you get into the ick of it from a cultural standpoint, because you're like, okay, I hear you on all of those things. I believe in the Bible. I believe in God. I hear you on all of those things. But here's the problem. I'm going to give my money to the church, and then it's going to be wasted. It's going to be stolen. It's going to be all of these things. You want me to trust a man and say that I've been faithful to God? And my answer to you on that is, I wish I had a better answer. Right? My more punchy answer to you on that is, if your lack of faith in the leadership of this church causes you not to be faithful to God with your money, you need to find a new church. Because you need to find a place where you're comfortable with being faithful to what God calls you to. And if you can't do that here, then we're a stumbling block for you. That's right. Like, don't let us be. Right? Like, now here's the other problem. It's like, okay, no. I trust you. I get it. I understand that we live in a fallen world, and so there's going to be jacked up means, and there's going to be some guys who screw it up, and I just need to find a church where they don't screw it up, and I need to be able to trust that. I'm with you on all of that. 10% is a lot of money. Yeah, it is. It's a lot of money. But so what do I do with that? I don't know. There's multiple approaches that people take, that pastors take, that I respect them. I respect their theology. I respect their doctrine. There's multiple approaches that they take. Some will tell you, you can't give 10 if you don't give 2. You can't give 10 if you don't give 1. You can't give 10 if you don't give 0.5%. Work your way there. I like this because it's not discouraging, right? Because the fact of the matter is that most Americans live on about 120% of what they make. We got lots of credit card debt. We got lots of debt. We got debt coming out our ears. We got credit card debt. We got home debt. We got. Shoot, you don't even need credit cards. You don't even need to have a house. You don't even need to have a car to get debt, because you can literally almost every purchase you make, you can finance almost every purchase you make with a click of like 3 buttons. There's so many lenders that will lend you money for 20%. You can do 4 installments of $60 on just about anything you buy, right? And so, like, we got debt coming out our ears. And so I like that. I like that approach because it's you can get your hands on it. There are other pastors who will say, you need to trust God. If you believe he created the world, then you just need to trust him. Take the leap and watch him work. I like that too. And here's why I like that. Because the fact of the matter is, you can't get to 10 if you don't start with 2. But a lot of us make excuses once we get to 2. And they're the same excuses we made when we were at 0. So I like that too, because it's like, hey, principles. Like, we got to have guiding principles. And if we don't have guiding principles, then we got nothing. Because life's way too complicated to not have guiding principles to live by. Look, everybody says you're your own worst critic, and in some ways you are, but you're also your own best lawyer. You make the best excuses for yourself. You can acquit yourself for any crime in your own mind. As long as nobody else is the judge, you win every time, right? And so my wife's watching The Lincoln Lawyer, so that's why we got into the legal stuff. Netflix got me. So, like, Those are the two approaches that I've heard said. I tend to lean more on the 10%, like just take the leap of faith, trust him, because he made everything. He gave you what you have. But I tend to lean that way. I also, gotta be honest with you, have never been an adult who wasn't tithing already. So I lean that way, but I don't want to sit here and yell at you about it because I've never had the fear of what 2% looks like. This is what I can tell you. I'm not rich and I probably never will be. I've tried to make money other ways. I've tried to do business stuff. I've tried to do lots of things. Everything other than ministry, I've failed at miserably. God called me to do one thing and he's only going to let me do one thing. So I'll never be rich. Because if you get rich being a pastor, there's some ways maybe if you write a book or something. But if you get rich being a pastor, you're kind of gross. I'm just saying. This is a promise between me and you, all right? If you ever see me pull into here in like a Bentley or a Mercedes or a Hummer, because that's probably more my style if we're being honest, you can yell at me and I should be okay with it. And if I'm not, you should definitely leave. All right? I'm not rich and I never will be, but I live in the overflow of God's abundance. I've run into more financial pitfalls in the last 2 years of my life than I thought I ever would in my whole life. I've failed at more things. None of them had to do with this. It was just all kinds of other stuff I was trying to do. I failed at more things. I've screwed more things up. And there were probably things God wasn't calling me to do, but in his grace, you know what's true? The daily life of my children has changed zero. The amount of money that I'm able to bring into my household has changed none. Because every time something comes up and fixes it, every time something happens and there's a way out, it doesn't mean I'm not paying the price. It doesn't mean I'm not doing what I need to do. It just means that every time something goes wrong, God fixes it and makes a way out. And I don't have to worry. I'm not making this up. I wish I could give you specifics, but that would be like not right, you know? Like I'm just not making this up. Like it's insane. I've watched him provide again and again and again. Like I'm not kidding you. I got a huge bill to change all the brakes on my truck. And truck brakes are more expensive than car brakes. And I received a check in that amount that week that I did not know was coming. When I was a little kid, I was the only free baby my parents had because I was born on welfare. And I grew up on stories of my parents being like, we didn't know how we were gonna keep the lights on that week and $100 would show up in the mailbox. We didn't know how we were gonna pay this bill and it just happened. It's not because God likes me more. It's because I trust him on his word. It's because I do what he asks. It's because I'm faithful to him with my money. And so I don't have to worry. I still do sometimes because I'm an idiot. Like, it's just true. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm sorry that other pastors have screwed stuff up and made it so you don't trust him. I'm sorry that the world is really hard. I'm sorry that you're in the place you're in. I just know that you have a God good enough to dig you out and make it so you don't ever have to worry again. And when you do worry, he'll still have grace for you. And eventually he'll teach you that you don't have to. Doesn't mean you'll be rich, but but you'll be free. And ultimately, that's the point. And ultimately, how great would it be if we actually lived that life with him? Like the vast majority of divorces, not the vast majority of divorces, I don't want to misquote this. The highest cause for divorce is money problems. The highest cause for divorce is money problems. Like God wants to work in your marriage too, but he might have to work in your marriage through your wallet. Can you trust him with that so that you can save the life you've built? You know, there's so much there. And let me just say this, like, what you decide to do today will not change. What you decide to do with your finances, whether you trust him with them or not, will not change the trajectory of this church, because God has a plan and he will carry it out with you or without you. I'm not asking, I'm not fundraising, I'm not telling you we're in trouble. What I'm saying is there's a blessing on the other side of the sacrifice that you're missing out on. I'm going to read Matthew chapter 6 to you, and then we'll close up. So this is Matthew 6. I wrote it down so I don't misquote it here. Matthew 6, 25 through 34. Jesus says this is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food to drink or enough clothes to wear. Isn't life more than food and your body more than clothing? Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for their heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you far more valuable to them than they are? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? Why worry about your clothing and what it looks like? And why worry about your clothing? Look at the lilies of the field and how they grow. They don't work or make clothing, yet Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as beautiful as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for the wildflowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith? If you trust him in your finances, that can be true. That you can live that way. Let's just not leave it on the table anymore, that's all. And if you don't trust me, give it to somebody else. Trust him. Let's pray. God, give us the faith to trust you in a broken world. Give us the faith to trust you in the way you lead us. Give us the faith to trust you even when it costs us in really real ways. And give us the eyes to see your blessings when they begin to flow. And give us a heart that's humbled by your mercy and your grace. Let us trust you and let us not miss the blessings. And when we see the blessings, let us be all the more faithful. We love you and we thank you. Amen.